Let's break it down. So last night, the enemy used 175 drones, more than 14 cruise missiles, and at least 2 ballistic missiles on Kyiv and its surroundings. This was reported by the Kyiv City Military Administration. Unfortunately, there are casualties. As of this moment, while I am recording, 15 people have died and more than 100 have been injured. Tomorrow has been declared a day of mourning for the victims. My condolences to the families and loved ones and to those who were injured, wishing a speedy recovery. But I think it's obvious to everyone who was in Kyiv last night, everyone heard and saw how it buzzed and exploded. It's just so obvious, blatantly obvious, how much Putin wants to end the war. By the way, I think there are a lot of foreigners in Kyiv. So I think that at the very least, they're passing this on at their own level, like the daughter of some Kellogg, for example, who made a post that was basically a cry from the heart. Like, Dad, what's actually going on? Are you even feeling okay over there? And the Russian Ministry of Defense reported, as always, that they used high-precision weapons against military targets. But you all surely saw those military targets today, right? They built a house, an entrance to a 9-story building. Moreover, the Minister of Internal Affairs said that this ballistic missilate went right through the roof of the building, collapsed the entire entrance, and even reached the basement. Ballistic, so this is what they call high-precision weaponry. I just can't forget that shot of that inconsolable father who is still waiting. The rubble hasn't been cleared, and he's waiting, hoping that his son will be found alive under the debris. He keeps breaking down in tears, and then you can see him just standing there, still hoping. I mean, I just can't get those morning images out of my head. And yes, of course, residential buildings, dormitories, the National Aviation University, a kindergarten, all of these are military targets. I mean, it's just so indiscriminate, the way everything's being hit. The most interesting thing, Trump stated that, by the way, Odessa also got hit hard today. And as for the frontline cities, I won't even start talking about them. There is just endless caps are flying, drones are flying, everything imaginable is flying. So, but Trump decided that Russia and Ukraine should fight a little longer, but in this case, it's only Russia. You know that Ukraine has been demanding a ceasefire for a long time now. But Trump says they still need to fight a bit more. This is how to fight, 15 people killed. Let me put it this way. If you don't impose sanctions, even though you could stop Russia but choose not to and just think, let them fight a bit more, then every person killed is also on your conscience. That's a fact. And by the way, he stated that he does not intend to impose sanctions on Russia yet. Donald Trump still needs to see something else. Supposedly, he's still waiting for a peace agreement. So here's a tricky question. All right, you're not imposing sanctions. Why not demand a ceasefire? Demand it, say, ceasefire. On the one hand, you know, there was this movie once about a maniac. He had like 13 different personalities living inside him. And so one of Trump's personalities, it's a really cool movie. And I think there's a very good British actor in it. And one of Trump's personalities says, but young people are dying there. We need to stop all this. Another one says, let them fight some more, what is even going on here? And yet everyone is just watching this. And do you know why he doesn't demand the ceasefire? Because then Putin would just send him packing straight away. In other words, he'll just strike Ukraine again, and it'll be rather awkward for Donald Trump. In fact, with these attacks during the G7 summit, Putin has already shown that he doesn't care at all about Trump's threats. Just a little longer, just a little more, and I'll outlast even you. And there will already be a different president, just so you understand. With a single signature, Trump could simply destroy the Russian economy. But all he manages to do is wipe his face when Putin spits in it yet again, and he just keeps repeating like a mantra, deal, 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 deal. Honestly, I think that after Trump leaves, this word should be banned at the state level or something, because it just triggers a gag reflex now. And I don't think the United States has ever felt such shame for its president before. And there's this feeling that Trump horridly left the summit, not only because of the situation in the Middle East, but also to avoid answering uncomfortable questions. Today, I saw a comment where 2 experts were trying to figure out what the latest massive shelling of Kyiv was for. Was it because of the spider web or something else? Or the attacks on Moscow? By the way, this is exactly the trap, and what Donald Trump did, he normalized the idea that Putin has the right to retaliate for something. Remember, he said, I'm quoting, President Putin said very firmly that he would have to respond to the Ukrainian attack on the airfields. And Trump didn't mention that he urged Putin not to do this. In other words, he normalized the idea that Putin can respond to something with some kind of retaliation. The aggressor who attacked the Ukraine supposedly still has the right to carry out some kind of retaliatory strikes. And then, let me quote again, Ukraine with its attacks gave Russia a reason to bomb it to smithereens. He justified any strike from Putin as a response to some sort of provocation. There can be no provocation. Ukraine is defending itself, protecting itself, and will strike Russian military power and destroy Russian equipment everywhere. But to normalize the idea that Putin supposedly has some kind of moral right, that's another matter. By the way, how have the Trumpists not commented on this attack yet? I think it's getting harder and harder for them in general. How do they put it? The art of the deal. Trump, you see, has set up a two-step plan. Now we'll witness the brilliance of his thinking. And the fact that Trump left the G7 summit is also very... the G7, the group of seven, that's also very typical of him. I understand that his main focus right now is the Middle East, where the US could be directly drawn in. But there are also a number of other reasons why, in his view, he had to do this to avoid public pressure after the strikes by the Russian Federation. In other words, ideally, this morning, after that strike, he was supposed to be sitting in a meeting with Zelensky. What do you think would have been the first question he'd be asked? Exactly. Isn't it time to impose sanctions? So he didn't want to answer those questions. And there was quite an interesting situation that happened there. Macron wrote that supposedly Trump went to work on a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. And Trump replied, you don't know anything? No, in short, you don't know, so don't talk. And do you know why Trump wrote that? Because dealing with the situation in the Middle East is not a valid reason to leave the summit early. You can handle that while you're there, especially since nothing extraordinary happened that night. But Trump created the impression that there was supposedly some deep, important reason, something so significant that Macron, you don't even know about it. And that's why I absolutely had to leave. Like a classic narcissist, he doesn't want to talk about uncomfortable topics. He's being petulant. It's like a 5-year-old child throwing a tantrum. I don't want to. I'm not going to talk about this. I won't. I'll run away from it, hide under the blanket. And naturally, he didn't want to sign the summit's joint statement on tightening sanctions against Moscow. Of course, he didn't want to. And Putin showed that he couldn't care less about your summit, about all of this, and Trump played along with him. That's the whole story right there. By the way, I looked at the timeline of the statements. There's a time difference with Canada, and you have to factor in the departure time of Air Force One, the presidential plane, considering the time difference. So the drone attacks began 7 hours before Trump decided to leave the summit. In other words, he couldn't not have known about it. He took off when the final phase of the ballistic missiles was already flying over Kyiv. So he knew perfectly well, not to mention the intelligence data. He knew everything perfectly well. So the timeline shows that he really didn't want to be in the same room, so to speak, with Zelensky after that strike. Let me emphasize again, I'm far from thinking that this was the main reason. Naturally, I think he originally decided to leave without signing or announcing the final communique, but in this case, he had to slip out even earlier. You know, it's like, guys, I didn't chicken out. It's just that, well, my parents suddenly called me home. That's exactly what this is like. Moscow believes that the White House won't tighten sanctions during negotiations, so they can bare their teeth and strike Ukraine again and again. And as I was recording this video, news came out. Trump was asked to comment on the overnight attack on Kyiv, and he indicated that at that moment, he hadn't yet heard that the attack had happened. So they asked him, how do you comment on the attack on Kyiv? He says, really? When did that happen? I don't know. And he said, that's bad. We need to check if this is true. We need to look into it. Come on, you knew everything perfectly well, probably before anyone else. Right after Putin, your intelligence services told you, he reminded me of some acquaintances from Crimea who, in the first days of the full-scale invasion, were saying exactly the same things. Seriously? When did that Russia is bombing? That can't be. We need to check. Russia couldn't do something like that. Maybe you're bombing yourselves, but that's not all. Besides the fact that Trump sometimes acts very poorly, though he absolutely doesn't care how you rate his acting, also decided to deprive Ukraine not only of offensive means, which we won't even discuss here, but also of defensive means. I've put together a selection just from this month. So June 8th, what happened? Minus 20,000 interceptor missiles for drone defense systems. Really, why would we need them? The Pentagon notified Congress that Ukraine will not have 20,000 interceptor missiles for drone defense. So when Russia is terrorizing us with its drones, we won't have these missiles. Yeah, sure. Why would Ukraine need them? June 5th, a batch of special fuses for shells that the armed forces of Ukraine use to shoot down Shaheds. We won't have those either. The first days, this is confirmed by the Wall Street Journal. The first days of this month, 90 Patriot interceptor missiles from warehouses in Poland, the delivery has been halted. This is reported by Axios. And 2 days ago, the administration decided that there will be no new Patriot and NASAMS batteries for Kyiv until the end of the summer. This is from The Telegraph, a leak from a briefing in the House of Representatives. Someone is systematically depriving Ukraine of air defense. It's interesting, isn't it? Now we'll get to the logical conclusion of all this. How can you not recall here that Ukraine and Russia are like hockey players? They need to be given the chance to keep fighting, right? Russia is being given the opportunity to keep fighting. Well, let me emphasize once again, Ukraine no longer wants to fight. Ukraine is demanding a ceasefire. But Russia, through its mustachioed mouthpiece, that Floozy Peskov, keeps saying that there are still some conditions to discuss and so on. They've talked the topic of a ceasefire to death. They've talked the ultimatum to death. And now Russia is being given the chance to keep fighting. Sanctions aren't being imposed while Ukraine is being stripped of its air defense systems. Do you know what this looks like? Like a joint effort to force Ukraine to accept certain conditions. Because if sanctions were imposed on Russia while Ukraine was being stripped of its air defense systems, I would say that both Ukraine and Russia are being pressured. So that's how it would go. But in this case, it's only Ukraine. I think that even the most diehard Trump supporters now really have to rack their brains to come up with some logical explanation for these events. Or you could take the approach of White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt, who apparently is already exhausted from trying to invent and stretch logical constructs to fit Trump's worldview. And now her rhetoric is as follows. You just don't understand the genius of Donald Trump's decisions. The time will come and you'll all understand. I think, yes, the time will come and everyone will understand everything. However, Ukraine has repeatedly proven that for every bold moth, there is a web waiting for it. And as I read today in a post by an acquaintance of mine who says, right now, the hope is in the sanctions from Budanov and Maliuk. And he says, really want to read how concerned they will be that Ukraine is escalating, that Ukraine is once again responding asymmetrically. Putin, he just can't tolerate this, he says. I just want to see it. I want to read about it. By the way, friends, you can see that not only are some of our partners not providing us with assistance, but they're also taking back what had already been allocated. So all our hope rests on us, on you and me. We are doing tremendous work, truly enormous. Myself, other speakers who are also covering large, small, and medium fundraising campaigns. Right now, the entire front is basically being sustained by this. That's why just recently we closed the fundraiser for electronic warfare equipment. Dozens of them literally just finished it, and dozens of drone operators as well. There's hardly anything we haven't raised funds for together. For the Legion, they're now buying everything they need over there. We closed the fundraiser at 2 million. That's why there's another fundraiser. Soldiers have been asking me for this for a long time. It's for the Vampire unmanned aerial system, which is commonly known as Baba Yaga, for the strike drone company of the 101st Brigade. Right now, they are defending Chasiv Yarone of the hottest spots on the front. In other words, the Russians don't spare their ghoul army there, while our soldiers are simply heroes. The Vampire is a huge hexacopter that can drop all sorts of things on the Russians' heads at night and during the day too, by the way. So the soldiers of the 100 and Honest Brigade have been waiting for it for a long time and reached out to me. Let's help them out. They truly are real lions. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video, and the bank card for donations is there as well. There's also a PayPal option for those who want to help from abroad. A huge thank you to everyone. If you're not watching on my channel, here's a QR code. It takes you directly to the donation page. Vampire will suit the Russians then. And look, here's some really interesting news. Narishkin says VR just won't let up. First, they accuse Ukraine of planning to hunt down European diplomats, then Russian diplomats, then someone else. But we're not going to hunt anyone except Russian war criminals. So Russia has accused Ukraine and Britain of preparing an attack attention from Moscow, supposedly, on an American ship in the Baltic Sea. Narishkin had a serious attack there. His imagination is running wild. I don't know, maybe Medvedev gave him some advice. I quote, "At present, the Ukrainians, together with the British, are preparing provocations in the waters of the Baltic Sea. One of the scenarios involves staging an alleged Russian torpedo attack on a US Navy ship. Torpedoes of Soviet and Russian manufacture have already been handed over by the Ukrainian side to the British. It is planned that some of them will explode at a safe distance from the American ship, and one will fail to detonate and will be presented to the public as evidence of Russia's malicious activity. What are the torpedoes supposed to be launched from? This is the first thing, but never mind, we won't look for logic here. This statement from Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service is a classic case of preemptive disinformation. In other words, they have repeatedly done this following in Goebbels' footsteps. Accuse your opponent of what you intend to do yourself. So this can be seen as an indirect admission of guilt. This is actually a classic tactic of both the SVR and the FSB to accuse someone of exactly what they themselves have done. Yes, I think the most striking and most accurate example is the Ryazan sugar. In 1999, so-called mystical Chechen militants, but in reality it was FSB agents, hexogen in the basements, bags of sugar, as they were later called. By the way, the recent incidents with the trains, they also really wanted to blame us there, saying it was a terrorist attack on the railway. Remember, at first they announced it was a terrorist attack, then they said it was just a bridge collapse. There was no terrorist attack at all. And then that bridge, the one that collapsed, the very next morning they just blew it to dust without any investigation or anything, just so there would be no evidence left. And then they changed the story back to a terrorist attack again. But the people responsible never changed, just like back in the late 90s when Patrushev was in charge of the Ryazan sugar. Now it's Patrushev again with these torpedoes in the Baltic Sea. As the head of the Maritime Board, he's responsible for sabotage and intelligence operations on the seas and oceans. So, Patrushev, take off your mask, log out, we figured you out. So, if something like this happens again, you'll know exactly where it's coming from. But remember, Patrushev always, he's got two left hands, that's just how he is. So there will always be some traces left behind, just like with the Ryazan sugar, just like with those bridges. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe. Let more people know the truth. And that's not even the full parade of lunatics for today. So what kind of program do we have for you today? Orban's ally and ruling party MP Alexandra Shenkirali has published a scandalous video opposing Ukraine's accession to the EU. She really got creative with it. In the video, you see Alexandra standing next to a car with a tied-up man lying in the trunk. She claims that after Ukraine joins the European Union, Hungary will be flooded with organ traffickers, drug dealers, human traffickers, and all sorts of other criminals. In other words, according to her, Ukraine's accelerated accession will result in serious expenses for Hungarians. She states that the costs of the war have already inflicted damages of 2.5 million forints per family, and the new aid to Ukraine will cost each household millions more. And she declares, the decision was made without us, the Hungarians, but we will not allow this. Brussels cannot decide the fate of Hungarians. Look, at the end, she calls on people to vote in this Orban-style referendum. They are conducting a very intensive campaign. They've covered everything with banners. And on the banners, Zelensky actually mentioned this too. They use Zelensky's face. But with the help of AI or Photoshop, they've made him look well. And Ursula von der Leyen is there too, and Zelensky, they all look like some kind of villains. I recently had an episode where I talked about 7 effective tools that Brussels can use against Orban and Fico. Some of these are already being used against Orban, but Orban and Fico are so dependent on oil and gas that without this doping, they can no longer control themselves. They start going through withdrawal, and each time they come up with something crazier and crazier, it's like a contest to see who can disgrace themselves the most, who can stoop the lowest in their love for kissing Putin's Botoxed ass. So these female deputies should really take a tour of Ukraine. I mean, if you want to criticize, fine. Come over, take a look, live in Kharkiv, get closer to the front lines, go visit Chasiv Yar. To really feel it, to see everything with their own eyes. I wonder, has she ever actually seen graduating girls all dressed in their black mourning dresses at their last bell ceremony? We've had a lot of those here. I recently came across a video where a graduating girl in a black dress is dancing a waltz with hugging the uniform jacket of her father who was killed. There are many like her, and she's not the only one in a black dress like that. Those whose fathers, brothers, loved ones have died. So, you don't want Ukraine to be in the European Union? Come here, see it all with your own eyes. How does it feel? You'll see things you've never seen in your life. Maybe then your mind will finally be set straight. And I went to this lady's Facebook page. I wanted to leave a comment and send this video, but you have to be subscribed for a certain amount of time to be able to comment. I saw a photo, the caption, "Fighters," and there is a boxing glove, Orban's smug, overfed face, and this satisfied female deputy standing there smiling. Let's say no to Ukraine joining the European Union. If we add Ukrainians to the EU, we'll end up fighting too. Well then, you get the feeling that this female deputy is only concerned about 2 issues. I scrolled through her page, LGBT marches and Ukraine. Those are the only 2 topics she writes about. Ukraine will survive a year or 2 without joining the European Union. But will Orban's regime survive a year or 2 without Russian oil and gas? That's a good question, isn't it? And after the war, we'll open our little black notebook where we've recorded everything in detail and draw the appropriate conclusions. So here you go, Orban, Fico, and now Austria as well, take note. And why should Russian energy resources be banned? You shouldn't do that. And we remember an Isle, for example, from Austria. Putin danced at her wedding, and later she worked for Russian state oil companies, just like Schroeder, for instance. So now the European Commission is about to propose a ban on new contracts for the supply of Russian gas. It will be difficult for both Fico and Orban to get around this veto because a slightly different scheme will be applied there. The ban will force most companies to terminate short-term agreements by 2026 and long-term ones by 2028. At the same time, the European Commissioner for Energy, Dan Jorgensen, stated that the European Commission will not provide EU countries with compensation for giving up Russian gas. That's right. And now, Trump's statement, "I've saved this for the end." Attention! There wouldn't have been a war if Russia had been in the gate, if it hadn't been kicked out. He said this ahead of the G7 summit, and I quote, "You wouldn't have a war right now if you had Russia." That was a mistake. You spend so much time talking about Russia, but it's no longer at the negotiating table, so that makes things more complicated. But you wouldn't have a war. Putin talks to me. He doesn't want to talk to anyone else. He feels insulted because he was thrown out of the gate, and I understand him. I would feel insulted too. So would you? Anyone would feel that way. But not everyone kills hundreds of thousands of people, invades another country, and tries to bite off a piece of someone else's land with their own teeth. Let's put it this way. Why did you kill Osama bin Laden? Why did you call him an outcast and a terrorist? He feels insulted too. So what if he killed American citizens? He was just pursuing his own interests. Why does no one want to talk to him? He feels insulted. And by the way, you could make a great deal with him. You could strike an excellent deal with him. Why did you offend him, huh? This is actually part of Trump's completely unhinged rhetoric, reducing international politics to personal relationships, where it's not international law that matters, but a friendly chat between strong men will decide who's responsible for what, where, and in which region. It feels like Trump went through some kind of street vendor school from the 90s. Just like cities were divided into zones of influence by criminal gangs back then, that's how he sees the world being divided. He replaces cause and effect relationships. The war didn't start because Russia was excluded from the gate. Russia was excluded from the gate because it began aggressive expansion. Crimea, Donbass, and then the full-scale invasion. And of course, justifying aggression through a sense of grievance. He got offended, right? That's a classic abuser move. So Putin got offended, and therefore the world was supposed to do everything to make sure he didn't feel hurt or upset. That's toxic, abusive behavior. It's your fault. It's your fault that I hit you. You pushed me to it. It's all because of you. You drove me to this. That's pure abuser, bastard rhetoric. Well, let me emphasize again, for every mangy scoundrel, for every mangy moth, there will be a web, maybe more than one waiting for them. That's why Ukraine has already proven that, despite the fact that sometimes even your former partners end up taking the side of your enemy, despite all of this, Ukraine knows how to fight back, knows how to respond firmly, and maybe even very harshly. Although Putin, I believe, and I've said this many times before, Putin is the kind of scum that needs to be beaten constantly, just as a precaution. If he's not waging war, he's up to some kind of mischief, hit him harder, hit him with sanctions, because if you think that Putin hasn't done something nasty, it just means you're not fully informed. He's always up to something bad somewhere, using other people's hands. That's just the way he turned out.